Hey Ian, how are you?
John, how are you?
Great, good to see you here. Okay, while that's happening, I'll call the meeting to order and look to the agenda. Are there any additions, changes? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. We have one lonely little delegation out there today, Mr. Wilson from Bow Valley Regional Housing. Welcome to Council Chambers. It's been a long time since we've seen you here.
It has been.
And it's nice to see you here.
Short, but thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Always a pleasure. Going forward, I don't know if you know this or not, we have a new chair. And he has suggested we do this twice a year. So
now that is a very clever idea.
Exciting, yes.
Why didn't the previous chair ever think of that?
I did.
Oh!
Yeah, constantly pushing me to do it. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you for having me. This is a bit of an update. I look forward to 2019. All questions are welcome, of course. I came completely old school, so sorry there's nothing to look at the screens. My question, though, is do we want a quick overview of what we do? Would that help? Because I know, so I'll tell you.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, it would help.
Yeah, I thought it might. Okay, so we are a housing management body. So what that means is for this region, we're tasked with operating the provincial housing in the region. So that means seniors lodges, senior self-contained, which is independent apartments for low-income seniors, and community housing and rent supplement. We have essentially two divisions. Our seniors lodges is our most active division, separate budget from the rest of them. So in our seniors lodges, not only are we housing people, but we're also preparing meals, housekeeping, providing all those personal services. Home care provides some healthcare related services in our buildings. And that's a separate budget from the other ones, as I said. And what's key there is when you see the requisition to the municipal ratepayers that we have the requisitioning authority for, those are only for the seniors lodges. We can't requisition for any of the other three programs that we oversee. We have two seniors lodges. Of course, our relatively new lodge here in town has 63 suites in it, and we have Cascade House in Banff, 21 suites. Anybody in the region is able to access our programming. In fact, Albertans can access our programming. We do have some residency requirements, and of course we also have to be cognizant and negotiate the world of the need to reside for our Banff properties. Our other three programs are what we call our social housing. And so that's all geared to low income, whereas our seniors lodges, low income seniors get higher priority rating, but really it's about affordable housing for seniors, supportive living, and we maintain the affordability with our rent geared to income model. So essentially the users pay what they can afford to pay. And our social housing is straight up 30% of income goes to your rent. So we have the independent seniors housing, which is just for low income seniors, 28 units on our lodge site here, 34 units in Banff. We have our family housing, 58 various styles of homes here in Canmore. Again, 30% of income, very affordable. And we also have the province's rent supplement program. So that's actually a financial supplement for people who are living or renting in private accommodation in the market, but they're still facing affordability issues for low-income families. They can apply to that program. We have roughly 38 people receiving those supplements on a monthly basis. I hope that's a good enough background for you, but again, feel free to ask questions. And if you don't have any, I'll move into a look back at 2018.
Just really quickly on that last note, the provincially owned social housing units that are scattered around town. Mm-hmm. I recall back in the dark ages when I sat on the regional housing board, there was talk at that time, and I know it was ongoing with the province about the province's interest or intent to make a major transition with those older units and perhaps sell off some of the land and build a more of a mid-density sort of a building somewhere that would bring better response to the need? Is that still something that province is talking about?
Not as much as they were. What we have seen in the last few years is a very strong focus on the seniors housing. It's still something that we talk about, that we think about. We think it makes a lot of sense to move forward in that direction, and it's something we'll continue to push for.
Great, thanks very much.
Cool. 2018, we housed or assisted approximately 400 people in the Bow Valley region. What I mean by assisted is most of them were housing in physical structures, but some of them are benefiting from that rent supplement, so we're helping to house them. That includes the seniors in our lodges, roughly 80 people in 2018 at any given time. Serving them, we prepared over 90,000 meals, another 1,500 meals or so for the CAMWAR Meals on Wheels program. Our housekeeping staff cleaned rooms over 5,000 times, something on the order of 8,000 bathroom cleanings, and we offered well over 500 recreational activities to the seniors in those lodges. We purchased a van or a handy bus last year. That's getting up and running. More and more, we're able to go further afield than we used to be able to go and feel comfortable doing so. It's working out really well. Our average lodge resident right now is an 84-year-old female, and our longest tenured lodge resident moved into the lodge in 1989. She's lived over there for a long time. We were subject to 2 licensing inspections on our lodges in 2018, and both of which we were found to be 100% compliant with the provincial regulations, which marks our 6th year in a row that we haven't had any deficiencies, which we're proud of. Our 2018 client satisfaction survey, we received a score, overall satisfaction, 94%. Now, move on. We own about $2.8 million in assets because we do own Cascade House in Banff. The rest of the projects that we manage and operate are the provinces. And for them, we manage approximately $47 million in assets in the Bow Valley. Our 2018 employee satisfaction survey scored overall satisfaction 89%, which we thought was pretty good. We had an employee turnover rate of about 16% in 2018. Typically, when somebody leaves our employment, they move out of the valley. We tend to have stable, longer-term jobs. Some of the projects that we worked on, there are a few in 2018, but the needs study is probably the biggest one. It's kind of long awaited and much anticipated, and we can't wait till we get it. And I'm anticipating a final report in Q1 2019. In fact, we just received the second draft, which should be all but the final draft. Sent it out to a few key stakeholders for a final peek at it. I have a meeting tomorrow and we'll discuss next steps there. As you know, we successfully relocated our lodge into the new building last year. That was quite an event, but it went quite well. But some of the deficiencies that carried over well through the year, the major ones were some showers. So we had some serious shower issues where they were draining out into the room instead of down the drain. We ended up with 6 of them that were quite bad.
That'd be a problem, wouldn't it?
It's you know, a little bit of a slip and fall hazard and things like that. Anyway, the province dealt with those just last month, just in the last few weeks, which means we were keeping 6 suites empty in case we had to move people around as showers were being repaired, and now we're filling those suites up, so we're finally moving towards optimal occupancy over there. And of course, we continue to assist the government of Alberta with their plans to build phase 2, 60-suite supportive living level 4 and dementia unit that will go on the old footprint. In the last month or so, we've made some good progress there, and the province has, I believe, today, formalized an agreement with a lead design build team. And that team is ready and actually really good prospects for a very good building. The contractor is solid. The architect is solid. They really know seniors housing and care facilities. Great. So we're excited about that. They are eager to start design right away, so I think the next 3 months will be quite busy working on design. And they would like to begin demolition and construction of the old lodge in the spring. Expect commissioning the new facility early 2021 if all goes well. And finally, we will have that level of affordable, high level of care here in the valley. So we're excited about that.
That's all great.
The board completed an awful lot of governance-related work. The chair led a lot of that. She was very interested in good governance, and she's left it in good hands. Because, as you know, Joanna was our chair for 4 years.
Was she?
She was. I don't know if you're aware of that or not.
Yeah, we heard about it.
Yeah, never. And now she's just stepping aside, and Grant's taken the reins. Grant Canning of Banff and Lisa Roswald from the MD is now our vice chair.
Great.
So, governance work. We did full reviews and updates to our strat plan, to our bylaws. We did a 5-year business plan, and we started a comprehensive policy review that we'll finalize in 2019. Lots of work has gotten done. Our total budget in 2018 was approximately $5 million, and the municipal ratepayers subsidized our lodges to the tune of about $1.6 million in 2018. A look ahead, we don't expect our daily operations to look much different in 2019, and let's hope they don't, because that means something's gone really weird. We'll carry on as we have, and we expect to have to meet those high standards of success that we always do. The needs study, as I said, will wrap up. Once the board has approved and accepted that, it will be shared widely. All housing stakeholders in the region, public, whoever. We want that information out there, so hopefully it helps people planning and taking next steps. As I said, I think we'll spend a lot of time on the planning for Phase 2. We're always looking to progress our Phase 3 concept. So that is the repurposing of some of those older senior self-contained units at the end of the property over there. We have 12 units on a quite large footprint that I think could quite handily handle 30 units. So we'll keep pushing for that.
Great.
Our 2019 operating budget, we expect will come in about 3% higher than 2018. The draft going to the board on Thursday, I think, is actually exactly 3%. And that will require a 3% increase to our municipal requisitions over 2018. And as I said, you may see more of me in 2019, so stay tuned. Thank you for your time, and welcome any questions.
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. It's really great to hear Phase 2 is kicking along in the way it is. I'm looking forward to seeing that work start, because we've certainly been talking about it for a long time. Yeah. And it's great. Kudos to the province for supporting the project here in the town of Canmore. Just at the end, you mentioned the requisitions, and I recall in the discussions years ago about some of the effect of completing both phases, so both wings. There was an anticipation that the requisitions would go down at that point.
Yes, that expectation still stands. We expect that on our Canmore campus of care here, by doubling the number of residents on that site, we're going to increase the economies of scale. So we expect the Canmore portion of the requisition to go down.
Do you want to put a number down and sign it for me?
Not at all.
No, okay.
I think $10 it might go down, something like that.
No, it stands to reason with the increased volume of units and increased revenues, efficiency of scale, that we'll look forward to seeing the requisition numbers going down. That'll be great. I don't know if other members of council have any questions for Mr. Wilson. Seeing none, thanks very much for being here. I think it's a great idea, and welcome you to come periodically. Just want to check for one thing now. When I did the tour of the lodge before it opened, I put a little dot on one of the doors. That's still there? Still there. No, Ian.
Did you? Yeah. Well, it was weird because Lynn came over and she picked one really far away from that one. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Take care.
See you. So turning then to the minutes, committee hall Tuesday, November 13th. Oh, who was that? Oh dear. Wow. Food bank, huh?
Yep, food bank.
Okay. Minutes committee of the whole Tuesday, November 13th. There are errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on to D1, homeless to housing strategy, or homeless to housing survey May 2018. Ms. Brown?
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of Council. I'm here today to present on the survey results from our May estimation homeless to housing survey. I'm standing as the chair of H2HC, Homeless to Housing Coalition, and with me is my colleague Amber Forrest, and she's our coordinator for H2HC and the one who's done the report and the analysis of the data. So as you know, H2HC is a group of interagency, intermunicipal individuals who've come together to look to organize supports and services for individuals who are experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness within the Bow Valley. Our vision is to understand who's impacted by homelessness, to increase community awareness, and to organize access to existing supports and services. As we go through the survey, you're going to notice that most of the numbers are from individuals who reside in either Banff or Canmore, and that's because an estimation survey is different than a population count. With an estimation survey, individuals come into organization services, which the majority are in Banff and Canmore, and then we provide them with the survey and we analyze the results. But Amber will get into that in a little bit more detail. So as a result, majority of the people who filled out the survey said that they resided in either Banff or Canmore. So I'm going to pass it over to Amber to talk about what an estimation survey is.
Welcome to Council, Ms. Forrest. Glad you could be here to present the report and take questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
So there's two methods of counting homelessness. One is called a point-in-time count or a PIT count, and that most often happens in large centers where there's big populations of hidden homeless. So it happens within 24 hours. You go out with teams of bylaw, volunteers, etc., and you count them usually in the middle of the night to see how many people are sleeping rough, and you would complete surveys with them. Obviously, that won't work here because we don't have a large population of rough sleepers and a lot of hidden homeless here. So instead, we decided to go with the population estimation, as Lisa said. So what that looks like is folks are coming in to access services in the Bow Valley, and as they come into those organizations, they'll be completing surveys with them. So they'd have to self-identify as homeless or precariously housed and be willing to fill out the survey. The other piece of this is called a known location count. So that means going to places where we know homeless people congregate. So that could be behind Save on Foods, down by the river. There's a number of places, campgrounds, things like that. So we could go there and see if folks were willing to fill out surveys in those locations who also identified as homeless or precariously housed. And the survey runs for 30 days instead of 24 hours. So that gives us quite a lot of time to actually collect that information.
Do you mind if we ask questions during the presentation, or would you rather wait till?
Whatever you're comfortable with. If you want to points of clarification, please do interrupt.
Just on that last point, so surveys were filled in by people that were accessing services. Do you have any sort of, have you made any assumptions on how that might multiply out into the community? I mean, there must be people out there that are not coming in and filling in the survey. So
we know that less, like the number of surveys that are completed is probably less than individuals who would actually be at risk of housing insecurity. And that's because often in rural communities, homelessness is very hidden. People are couch surfing, or they're overcrowding, or they are going between people's homes, or patchworking housing. I know I was talking to an individual and he was telling me him and his girlfriend are living here for 5 months, and then they're going to go live somewhere else for another 3 months, and then they're going to house it for 2 months, and that would all be considered at risk of homelessness. So we know that the number is less, but we don't know to the extent.
Okay, thank you.
So why do we conduct a population estimation? And it's really just to formally put and explicitly put what we anecdotally hear. We know that Canmore is expensive. We know that we have one of the highest living wages in Canada. And we know that our median income is on par to the median income of Alberta. We also know that our rental rates in both Banff and Canmore are high, and that our vacancy rates are close to zero. We know that our municipal supports programs in both Banff and Canmore are in high demand, and in Canmore, the eligibility cutoff is $15 an hour. And we know that our economic drivers are seasonal. We know that during boom times, during busy times, there's a lot of full-time work, and then it tends to slow down on our shoulder seasons, which can put people at risk. So Amber's now going to go through all of the data.
Just before we do start that, from the report, you mentioned that there would be another survey done in November. So just curious, what were the numbers of respondents in November?
Yeah, I did try to get those numbers before I came in. I think it's less than what we had for the May estimation. For a multitude of reasons. It was, we saw that there were a lot of people who were coming in who were accessing our affordable supports program, but they took a survey and they didn't hand the survey in. The Job Resource Centre said that there's a lot of people coming in looking for jobs with employee housing, but they weren't able to get the survey completed. So I don't have the exact number. Do you have the number?
Banff was 29 people completed the survey in Banff, as far as I know it. I'm not sure about Canada.
I think we were about 21, and then I think our online survey was about 23. Yeah.
And so the expectation, I was thinking would be, given November is, moving into the cold season, there would be less people living in those situations than in May, when it's just an assumption, but is that recognized in the work studies you've been doing?
That's definitely a piece of the conversation and something that we're keeping track of. I think May was very busy, and probably not as many people who could have filled out the survey. And November, we still see a lot of people who are seeking affordable supports. And I drive by the space behind Save on Foods fairly regularly, and I'm shocked to see how many vehicles there are still there.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so to give you some details on the May estimation count. So the homeless estimation count was, like I said, over 30 days it was done. So it was mid-May to mid-June, and 4 agencies ended up taking part or actually returning surveys. So there were 2 known locations done. One was done in Banff and one was done in Canmore. So this was done in conjunction with Bylaw Services. They went out to places, like we mentioned, where they knew people would be car camping or staying in RVs, things like that, and completed surveys with them. The questions on the survey follow the Alberta Rural Development Network, or ARDN's, guide. So they had set out a guide a couple of months previous to that and had suggested certain questions that could be used for the survey. So we tried to follow their lead on that, and we did make a couple of exceptions to that. So I'll go into more detail a little bit later on, but the exceptions were to sort of capture this unique situation of the Bow Valley. So we just altered a couple of things here and there, and then we ended up with 69 people completing the survey overall in May. So as far as the results go, we had almost equal number of respondents in Banff and Canmore. There wasn't too much of a difference. And the 8 participants responded as other. So those responses included things like Quebec, Calgary, etc. As far as demographics go, we had slightly more men than women completing the survey. If you're at all familiar with any of the counts done in urban centers, you often see a much larger distribution between men and women, so a lot more men than women. And that could be, there's a lot of reasons why that could be. One could be that men tend to sleep rough a lot more often than women. So in our community, we actually saw a slightly smaller discrepancy there. And the demographic ages, so this may not be a surprise to folks in the Bow Valley, but our largest demographic was the 25 to 44 range. Our second largest was the youth range, actually, so 18 to 24 years old. And again, that could be due to our seasonal workforce, but just a note of interest. And then our seniors were only at 2%, so 65 plus. So we asked the question, did you come to Canada as an immigrant or a refugee? And 20% of people identified as entering Canada as an immigrant, 2% as a refugee, and 78% said no, they didn't come as either. And the question around, did you identify as Indigenous? So we had only, out of the 56 people who responded to this particular question, We only had 5% who responded yes or identified as Indigenous. So this right away for me was of note because in urban centers, again, you would see upwards of 26% of folks in the homeless and precariously housed situation as identifying as Indigenous. And what little research there is on other rural communities and their situation, it has been noted that when rural communities are located near a reserve or a community of Indigenous folks, that they do actually see a larger respondents than we did. And so I just thought this was something to be interested in and something to do a little more research in, considering our proximity to Stoney Nakoda. So we thought we would probably look a little bit into system usage and migration patterns and just sort of find out where they are actually accessing services. So key characteristics of folks in the Bow Valley. Length of time in the Bow Valley. So some folks might assume that folks who are seasonal or who are living in a precarious situation might actually just be seasonal, but we did see that 16% of people had been here between 1 and 10 years. 44% had been here less than a year. 19%, which is other, so what's in there is declined to answer people who had responded things like back and forth, and answers like days, months, and years that were hard to quantify. And then we did also have 21% who were here for more than 10 years. So that seemed significant. And do you change your place of residence seasonally? So almost half of folks responded yes or sometimes to changing their place of residence seasonally. And of course, we see 50% who don't. So it was about half and half.
So, and in that question, is it intended to discover whether they're finding better shelter during the colder months here in Canmore, or they're simply leaving town for warmer climes in the colder seasons?
Well, the question, it wasn't really qualified, so we didn't get a lot of more information than do you change your place of residence seasonally. It was specifically asking, are you leaving the Bow Valley during that time, rather than are you just shifting your place of residence within the Bow Valley? But it's hard to know why people were changing their residence, because that part wasn't really.
So this graph shows that 30% are simply leaving the valley?
Yeah, so they definitely are, and then some folks leave sometimes. So those folks, again, it's hard to make assumptions about them, but it could be that they live here seasonally every season and that they sometimes leave and sometimes don't. Again, this question doesn't have a lot more to it than that, so it's hard to know why they're changing their place of residence seasonally.
Yeah, so just trying to pull some notions out of that. So it means half of the people don't change their place of residence seasonally.
Yeah, so half of the respondents were here all year long.
But is it, do they move into some different shelter during the cold months, or what do we know about that?
I think it's probably a combination. So some individuals maybe are, they're more at risk of homelessness. They're feeling that their houses they could be one paycheck away, or they maybe they got another job with employee housing. Maybe they were able to get a roommate at that time, but it might be for a short period of time. So I think the do you change your place of residence seasonally gets to some people who maybe very much plan to come here for the summer or come here for the winter months and then move on. And we know that that's a significant part of our population. And some people who maybe don't plan it or have an opportunity to stay longer.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so wanting to know where folks got their income from. 58% of folks who were unstably housed or homeless did identify as also being employed full-time. 23% were seeking social assistance, so that included seniors benefits, AISH, EI, and child benefit. And 35% of folks who completed this question had more than one source of income. So multiple different jobs.
But
or different sources of income. So that could include money from friends and family. That could include a student loan.
But the majority have full-time income.
Yeah, 58% were full-time employed.
Presumably low income, but they're working full-time.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be actually at the time of the survey as well, that they had full-time income.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. I note that AISH is one of the benefits and EI and seniors benefits. So is there not some sort of check and balance in place, in particular with the recipients of AISH, as to where people are actually accommodated, or can they get their check anywhere, or how does that work?
You have to have a residence, typically, to get Alberta supports, like AISH and like income supports. And there are people who live in the Bow Valley who are accessing AISH. And there are people who have a permanent residence, maybe for Alberta supports, for the government's purposes, somewhere else outside of the Bow Valley. So they're still collecting their check, but then they're trying to live here.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So when we ask the question, do you consider your housing situation to be unstable or easily lost? And if yes, why? What we ended up with was 36% of folks identified as having unstable housing or easily lost because of poor and inadequate housing conditions. So that could be just not a lack of available housing. It could be housing that was overcrowded. There's lots of ways to sort of quantify inadequate housing. 35% of folks said other, and in the other category, 33% of the people who answered other had said lack of affordability and availability as the reason for their unstable housing. 30% said they were unable to pay their rent or mortgage, and 17% cited conflict with landlord. Also of note, there were two other pieces. So job loss and conflict with roommate were 15.4% of folks who responded to the survey as being why their housing was unstable.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. So that's the 15% is in the 35%. Is that what you mean, or?
No, it's on its own. Like, because what ends up happening is folks might actually answer more than one response.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it doesn't tally up to 100%.
So this was brought up at the presentation, that the community presentation was how we sort of classify housing. Employee housing itself, by the virtue of the nature of that it's tied to your job, that you have 24 hours to get out if you lose your job, could mean that people who are housed in employee housing are also precariously housed because they don't necessarily run on the Landlord-Tenant Act. They run on the Innkeepers Act, correct?
I guess.
Did we do any kind of follow-up on that based on that being brought up in the meeting in terms of trying to quantify that, or
yes,
is that going to be something that we maybe count in future?
What we had heard at the meeting is that potentially certain businesses do use the Residential Tenancy Act and others use the Innkeepers Act. So that was something that we took note of and something that we wanted to follow up on. So we haven't yet, but our intention is definitely to, at some point, potentially get together with folks who have staff accommodation and find out a bit more about what that looks like. So which one are they using? Why are they using that? How does that work? And is there some sort of landlord liaison work that we can do in that area?
Right. Okay, thank you.
So the question around who is staying with you tonight, 50% of folks who responded to this question said no one. The other category, 44% of people in that category had said friend. Another significant piece of that category was roommate, is how it's considered. And then 16.2% was spouse. This may differ from other communities around the province because we just used the ARDN survey this last month. And the way they had worded the question was around which family member are you staying with, and they had really strongly weighted it towards family member. Whereas in the Bow Valley, again, could be because of our seasonal population or just people relocating here, there wasn't almost anyone staying with a family member here. So that makes, I think, our community a little bit more unique. And reasons for seeking assistance. So why did folks come into these organizations in the first place? So 60.4% were looking for support with housing issues. 39% were seeking supports with basic needs, and 30% were looking for employment concerns.
So then we organized and collated the data to describe whether or not somebody is unsheltered or emergency sheltered. And we defined unsheltered as people living in public or private spaces without consent or contract, and people living in places not intended for permanent human habitation. And what we found is 30% of people said that they are living in their vehicle and 1% in a public space. And then we also looked at emergency shelter, which is emergency overnight shelter for people who are homeless, experiencing family violence, and or fleeing natural disasters. And 3% were accessing our emergency accommodation space at the YWCA, and 4% were accessing the YWCA's domestic violence shelter.
Maybe you'll address this later, in which case just say so, but the 30% staying in a vehicle, is there any way of, in the survey, of teasing out how many of those folks were sort of living in their vehicle as part of the adventure, you know, coming out the mountains, climbing or whatever, and staying in the van because that's what you do?
I think those are things that we need to really delve into because this survey was based on Alberta Rural Development Network, which is a survey for across rural Alberta. And I don't think a lot of the other communities have that same draw of living in your van to climb. What we've heard anecdotally is that, yes, there are people who maybe even have a primary residence outside of Canmore, and then they come and then they stay here within Canmore. But there are some people who at first thought it would be good to live in your van over something like employee housing or having precarious housing elsewhere. But then now that it's becoming winter, or now that, you know, it's not as appealing once you're into the day-to-day of it, when you're trying to find a place to use a bathroom facilities or showering, whatnot. But it is something that we need to look into more. And our department, Community Social Development, is really looking into the idea of what would safe parking look like, and really delving into, is it a need, or is it just a inexpensive vacation?
So there would be some sort of questions on future surveys that might delve into that?
There might be. What we might do is have the ARDN survey and then have some complementary questions on top of that as well.
Great. Thank you.
So we also organized as provisionally accommodated and at risk. So provisionally accommodated is interim housing for people who are homeless, people living temporarily with others, but without guarantee of continued residency or immediate prospect for accessing permanent housing, and people accessing short-term temporary rental accommodation without security or tenure. So 24% said hotel, motel, hostel. 12% said travel trailer RV, which I think could also be that car camping. 10% somebody else's place, and 3% campground. I don't believe there is an option for employee housing, so that might have come out here, if there was. And then we also talked about at risk, so people who at immediate risk of homelessness, individuals who are precariously housed. That's that one paycheck away. If you were to lose your paycheck, then you're most likely going to lose your home. And we found 12% lived in their own apartment and identified as that.
So every survey has limitations. This one was kind of the first of its kind. We have done counts before, but they weren't quite like this one. So this one was just a little bit more robust, asked some slightly different questions, and was collected in a different way. And it was done with the intention of sort of setting a baseline. So as you said, what we're hoping to do is establish some trends, or kind of see how things go season to season, and if things change drastically, and maybe hopefully not too much, but we'll have the opportunity to tweak some questions or maybe add some extra questions for the data that we didn't really get a good picture of this time around. And then again, it was service-based. So you'd also picked up on this piece, is that we were relying on people to come into these services. So it is a certain demographic already. It's people who are already seeking services and who are willing to identify and take the survey. So we're definitely missing out on some folks in the community who didn't come to those organizations. And then we did also do the known location count, but it's possible, again, that we missed some folks in different areas. Again, this was done on paper. The first set of surveys was done on paper, so people coming into these agencies were not offered an electronic option. There wasn't also anything online that people could do from the comfort of their homes or a coffee shop, so it was a little bit less accessible, so that was something we thought for next time around. And actually in November, we did offer an electronic option. and only 4 organizations were able to return surveys. So we haven't had a chance to really delve into what some of the challenges were, but Lisa did mention this time around what some of them had been for the Job Resource Center and a few others. So there were, folks that were pretty busy, or people just weren't able to fill out the survey for one reason or another. The survey this time around was a bit longer, so it could have been a bit of respondent burden. So I guess we'll kind of have a better picture after this one is done, but that was part of it. And then surveys were completed in Banff and Canmore. So again, when we talk about the Bow Valley, we had a little back and forth about what does that mean and how do we define the Bow Valley, but we're looking at supporting people from Lake Louise and Exshaw and Kananaskis and things like that. So it's hard to know how many folks from those areas we actually caught and what that picture looks like in Lake Louise or any of those other communities, because it was actually just focused in Banff and Canmore. So we're assuming we did catch some folks, but we don't know how many, and we probably did miss people there again. And as far as unique identifiers go, this would be a way to ensure that nobody duplicates the survey. So we didn't have a unique identifier the first time around. We did the second time around. Instead what we did was we said, if you had filled out the survey already, please don't fill it out again. And then I went through and tried to double check and make sure there weren't any similar or duplicate responses, and hopefully, but we can't absolutely guarantee the first time around that there weren't duplicates.
So what help is available? We have created an emergency accommodation procedure, and that's to ensure that there's even access across the Bow Valley, across Banff and Canmore. So if you go into Banff and you go into Canmore, they'll give you the same options for emergency accommodation. We collectively provide basic case management. So what we found is that originally, the YWCA, which is the nonprofit who's really doing a lot of the emergency support piece, they were also doing the next step planning. So we worked with FCSS Banff and FCSS Canmore came to the table to say that this is something that we could do. We could do the next step planning to save that from the YWCA and to make sure that people are getting that consistent follow-up care and so solution-focused counseling. We trained organizations on how to access the emergency accommodation procedure. So that every door is the right door. What we wanted is that if you came to FCSS Canmore, or if you came to the Job Resource Center, or if you went to Alberta Health Services, you would still be offered the same options and be able to access the emergency accommodation procedure. We renovated, we got a grant through Alberta Rural Development Network to renovate 2 dedicated spaces at YWCA. So that now we have an emergency accommodation space, 2 of them. And then this is funded, this space is also funded through Crossway Benevolence Thrift Store Fund. We work with Alberta Rural Development Network to make sure that we are part of the provincial conversation on homelessness. Right now, Alberta Rural Development is the only rural network in all of Canada that looks at supporting rural communities. And so this is something that we're very lucky for, because the majority of homeless funding from the province goes to the 7 urban municipalities in Alberta. And so by having that unified voice through Alberta Rural Development Network, we can start looking at getting some funding. And the funding that we have currently is through Alberta Rural Development Network, which is through HPS, the Housing Partnership Strategy with the federal government. And then we are working with Alberta Rural Development to collect data so that we can get a kind of a provincial picture of what rural homelessness looks like and start making that case for funding as well as for us. So what's the next steps for H2HC? We want to hear your thoughts.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood. So there's 2 living units at the YWCA that are available to all of the involved agencies access?
Through the emergency accommodation procedure, yeah. So not everybody would be eligible to access those spaces. You have to make sure that you're safe for the staff and for the people staying at the shelter or at the hostel as well. But at least it's a dedicated space so that there is some place for somebody to go.
That's great. And those units are funded through Crossway?
Yes, yeah. So H2HC got the grant for the renovation, and then Crossway gives H2HC funding so that we can maintain those 2 rooms.
Great, thank you.
So what's the next steps for H2HC? We wanted to incorporate what the community said as well as what you said into our strategic planning. We're going to continue to collect data. We're going to continue to develop community partners. We're going to refine our emergency support and hopefully offer more options. And we're going to try to seek sustainable funding.
So when you talk about developing new community partners, is talking about outside of Banff and Canmore, and I'm thinking particularly of Morley, which, I mean, it's noted in the report that the Bow Valley includes the town of Morley, although just out of curiosity, I note that on page 9, the residents, there's detail on the population of everything except Morley, even though the paragraph above recognizes that Morley's part of the valley. So,
yeah.
So I guess that's two questions. Is there a reason why Morley's population wasn't included in that count on page 9? And is that your intent through bullet number 3 to work also with Morley?
Yeah, so our intent is to start that conversation. I've chatted with the Stony Dakota Health Authority a few times on housing, and they do have their own housing strategy right now. I think that we probably would have seen higher Indigenous numbers if we were going to look at people who were accessing the hospital if they completed the survey. And it's just that the services that where the survey was just tends to have lower Indigenous access to it. Not zero, but lower. I think that that's definitely an option that we would like to go into. And I think that the whole point of this is making sure that you have the right option for that individual. So if there is supports on reserve, that's what we should be focusing on strengthening.
Also, we wouldn't mind partnering with the business community. That was something we had talked about, and connecting with folks who have staff accommodation and things like that. So just to open that dialogue and get them involved in the work. And we also had started forming partnerships with Calgary, because we do end up referring a lot of folks to their emergency accommodation and shelters, basically. And so we just wanted to connect with them, and obviously they don't want folks coming in, and we don't want folks coming in. So we're going to try and work with them on some level to try and turn that around.
And that's actually the end of our presentation. So welcome any more questions.
I just have one or two questions. On that page I referenced earlier, page 9, the section on income, it reads, not quite sure, it says, according to the town of Canmore and the town of Banff, the living wage for Canmore is considered one of the highest living wages in Canada. So I don't think you mean the town of, I mean, according to the town of Banff, living wages here are high.
Yes.
I was expecting to see the living wage in the town of Banff to follow from that first sentence.
The town of Banff does not do a living wage report, but we can adjust that. That is misleading. But what the town of Banff has said is that affordability is a significant issue for them, as it is for us.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, and their median income is actually lower than the Alberta median income.
Great, and a similar question just for context in the report. The section below that on housing notes the current average rate for a one-bedroom in Banff, but it doesn't have the related or the similar information in the town of Canmore.
And we do have that data. We can make sure that we add that. And it's very much on par to that.
Thanks. Just, thinking forward for continuity of information.
Yeah.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I just wanted to ask a question. So the fall survey, you did an online survey, but in the spring you did a in-person survey. Is there a benefit one over the other, or do they both have strengths? I'm going to guess that when people come in to do the survey, then you can actually chat with them and see if there's any supports that you can offer them right there on the spot. But then, of course, the convenience of the online survey means that you have the opportunity of more people filling it out. But then you have the concern of repetition, same person filling. Like, is there one that you would, is there ways that you've seen to sort of solve both issues based on convenience and time and people's computer abilities and access?
I think the combination is probably the best. The online portion for the one that we did in November actually isn't going to, so one of the things I didn't mention is that our November survey is part of a larger provincial survey, so they're wrapping up all the numbers. But the online piece is not wrapped up because it's a service-based. The estimation is actually supposed to be service-based, people who are accessing services. So it kind of deviates from the definition slightly. We like to do it because we still need those numbers. We want people who are not accessing or not comfortable with coming into access to to still have that opportunity to fill it out. The good thing about the paper one is that we can reach out to individuals that we have that relationship with who wouldn't identify as being at risk of homelessness.
Wouldn't realize that they're considered to be precariously housed already.
And we find that a lot of people, that was probably our biggest feedback, is that, well, I'm not homeless, so why would I fill this out? And so even individuals who, like I was chatting with Bow Valley Community Connections, and they were saying, there's no place for my adult children with disabilities to have a place to live that's supportive living within Canmore. But we would never consider those individuals homeless, but those individuals are at risk because they cannot find the appropriate housing in their own community.
And if their parent were to pass away and they were an adult,
they would need to leave the community.
They would go into care.
That's right.
Interesting.
So the ARDN survey that was done online, it was meant to be filled out online in the agency. So yeah, so that is the qualifier. And then we actually did a second one, a SurveyMonkey one that people could do outside of that. But again, knowing that there could end up being duplicates that way. So the reason why they wanted it to be filled out in the agencies is because then you could monitor that there weren't duplications, whereas the online version there may be. So when we're collating our data, we're going to keep that in mind and possibly keep the data separate and just, yeah, do some caveats around that. But I do agree that filling things out in paper or in person is beneficial because not only can you connect the person to supports and services, but you can also get a sense of their particular circumstance. Whereas, as you mentioned, some of those questions don't really give a lot of detail. And if you're doing it in person, you can get a better picture of what that looks like, potentially.
And the other question I had is, it's my understanding from a few business owners in Banff that they actually had underutilized staff housing in Banff this summer. Is there any comment as to why they thought that might be? There was actually a vacancy in staff housing in Banff. It was actually brought up in that meeting. Oh, wow. Somebody brought that up and nobody recognized it. But I just didn't know if you'd heard that with your partners in Banff at all.
No, we didn't hear that. And really something interesting to dive into and to get more details about. Off the top of my head, and I'm not sure if this is the actual reason, is that staff accom has a lot of, it limits freedom quite a bit. And so if you have, if you wanted that freedom, or you're living with a partner, or you have a pet, then it's a difficult, or a family, it's not always the best option.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
And I just want to add one other thing. When we were talking about connecting to community partners, one piece that we have missed so far is lived experience. So any organization who does a lot of good work around homelessness and does gather their data about homelessness benefits from having a lived experience group that can help inform the work. And so we're going to be looking for that.
Great. Are there other questions from members of council? So this work up to date has been fully funded by ARDN, which is great.
Yeah, and actually the 2 spaces that we have at YWCA Banff, we rented that out for low affordable housing, and that gave us a little bit of an income as well.
And future funding, is that assured through ARDN, or what's the expectation in the future?
Well, we're in conversations with ARDN right now. There was a rumor at one point that they might be extending a grant, but I'm not sure if that's still the case. They are waiting to hear what's happening with the province and with the federal government before they know what kind of funding that they have to deal with. We're also looking at a SIP grant, seeing if we can get the community incentive program through the province of Alberta, and if maybe that's something that we can look at. And then we're also thinking about maybe even just doing some fundraising, and what kind of fundraising could we do to try to keep some sustainable funding.
Okay. I'm sure you have ongoing work planned for 2019, but that's totally subject to ARDN or SIP applications?
Well, before we even had the ARDN funding, we were still H2HC. It just means that we can do less. So we didn't have funding for Amber's position, and we now have the unit, so at least that's still there, whether or not we get additional funding from ARDN. And Crossway Benevolence Thrift has been very good about maintaining their funding.
Oh, that's great.
And just one other thing to keep on your radar is that the homeless partnering strategy is actually wrapping up. So at the end of March 2019, I think it was a 10-year funding stream, and it basically is ending, and they're going to rebrand and repackage as Reaching Home. So the federal government actually there's a bit of a lag between March 31st when everything wraps up and when they actually introduce the new package in April, and they've recognized that, and so that's part of the question around whether they'll just bridge a lot of the funding agreements until we can actually apply for the next round of funding. So we're just waiting to find out about that as well.
Absolutely. And we also are in discussions with the province of Alberta. So they came to the conference that we had here in October, and then they've asked us to keep them appraised of everything that we're doing with H2HC.
Well, that's great. And thanks very much for the work you've been doing, the ongoing work, and presenting this report. It forms a good piece of base information to sort of follow through in future years and see how various programs, initiatives we take on may change that information. So thanks for doing the work.
Thank you very much for your time.
Then I'll move to item E1, council updates, and follow the usual format. Any member of council has questions related to any other councillor's report? This is an opportunity. I'll start with a question for Councillor Seeley. So a bit of a cryptic note under the Canmore Museum, you say the lamp house is getting closer. What does that mean exactly, Councillor Seeley?
It's been complicated. We are working on it, but we're working with the town, we're working with the province, and we're working with our own organization to look at some feasibilities and some ideas. So are we just going to restore it, or are we going to restore it and have tours there? It's all part of the process, so we're still working away on it. We don't know what that looks like, but we are getting closer. And we started the fundraising, so we're doing good work in that area. So if we do get a municipal grant, we can quickly move forward.
What's the budget? I mean, what's the...
Well, we're looking at that too, because the initial budget was $175,000. We don't think that number is going to do it. So it'll probably be more than that. So what is it? So we're doing those sorts of feasibilities. And then the town would need to write a bylaw once we got a little further ahead. So I'm thinking it'll be a little over 200,000 is where the restoration project would come in. And the municipal grant, we can raise, it's matching. So once we qualify for that, if we qualify for that, it can be matched up to $100,000 a year. So 50,000. And then we match 50,000.
Is it a municipal grant, Councillor Seeley?
It's a municipal grant, but it's not paid by the municipality. It's a provincial.
A provincial grant?
It's a municipal designation.
Okay.
So provincial money funded through or fueled through the municipality?
Yes.
And that's been applied for?
No, because we need to finalize things first. And the town will need to write a bylaw to support the restoration.
Why would we need a bylaw?
So actually, Ms. Cottle and I just met with Jason Garapi yesterday, And this wasn't the topic of the conversation, but he gave us a brief summary of where they're at. We may need a bylaw, I believe, for a historical designation.
Yeah.
Similar to other properties that we've designated as historical. The Provincial Society looks to the municipality to for alignment there. There is some concern about the remote location and whether or not restoration should occur there, or potentially even to reconstruct and redo the project somewhere else. But I think all of that is being looked at through the feasibility. There is also some concern around the ongoing operational cost of once it's restored, who maintains and provides operations for it. So, we heard that there's still some challenges to be considered, and that's all being reviewed through a feasibility analysis.
Great, thank you. Question for Councillor McCallum, I guess, on the Bow Valley Regional Transit. So the fourth bullet down notes that service continues to be up over 2017 by 34% for the month of October and 52% year to date. That 52% year to date includes the major hit that we saw in the summer, the free ridership.
That's budgeted in there, yeah.
Right. So that 50% year-to-date increase includes quite a significant increase because of the free transit. Right. Thank you. Any other questions from members of council? Seeing none, I'll move on to item F1, the service area reports. And look for questions under the CAO's office, section A. Section B, municipal services. Section C, corporate services. Any questions under section D, municipal infrastructure? Okay, there seems to be no questions at all from members of council for the service area reports. Gold star. Moving on to item G1, the council resolution action list. Any questions around outstanding resolutions? Seeing none. Let's see how we doing time-wise. Oh shoot, I gotta kill 25 minutes yet. Well, the agenda clearly says we'll adjourn at 2:20. That's, oh, it's only 20 minutes I got to kill. Any questions related to the Bow Valley Regional Housing Report? Seeing none, I'll move the committee hold be adjourned. Those in favor, opposed, meeting's adjourned.